There's a new version of Agony! Fuck. Indeed, it seems as if the devil didn't die, as Madmine Studios is still kicking and left the kitchen door open for a naive audience to be sucked into their web of misinformation and lies. They wanted $66,666, we gave them $170. They said 1 year, they took 2. They promised the most troubling, terrifying vision of hell to ever rake our senses, and... I was going to make a switch around joke, but by God, no they didn't. This game was awful. It was the most tedious, lazy excuse for a money grab that I have experienced. But, to be fair to the game, it was unfinished. A year ago the hype had long since died down, and rather than let people forget about it and not disappoint the $170,000 worth of believers to have backed the project, Madmine Studios released a version of Agony that was half-assed and shoddy. Collectively, we all smacked them on the head for it, and eager to move on from the overwhelmingly bad reception, MMS announced the production of Paranoia, but not before sitting down to actually finish the game and released it as Agony Unrated, complete with traps, spooks, and the unedited endings that was considered too crude for the initial release. Basically, this is Agony as it should have been, and according to the Steam ratings, this final push made it a worthwhile game. 2019 is upon us, a third of my videos all concern Agony, and I am eager to move the hell away from it, pun intended. So is it Stockholm Syndrome, or has the game actually gotten good? Before I give my judgment on that, I want to go over what made the game so bad in the first place, because the Agony Facebook admin asked me a question that I think is pretty good. Maybe Agony just wasn't my kind of game? And that is actually a good point to make. It may just not have been my type of game, and it is very difficult to make a difference between personal preferences, general consensus, and expert judgments. I am by no means an expert, but I do try to make a difference between what I like and what's good, and not just assume they're one and the same. So I'd like to start by addressing that. The gameplay in Agony is very straightforward. You walk around an environment and try not to get killed by monsters. It's the basics of basics of survival horrors. When the gameplay is this simple, I want a story to engage me and keep me motivated, and there is no story in Agony. It's got a narrative to guide you, but that's it. The only real motivation is a morbid desire to experience this eroticized hellscape. So maybe the problem is with me, but I doubt it, because I do enjoy games without a story, if the gameplay is entertaining enough. You could argue the gameplay in Agony is the same as in a giant like Resident Evil 7, but that game kept you far more involved in a far more threatening environment. Resource management, obscured environment, death that meant death, and even just little things like peeking around the corner helped make it more immersive and thrilling. In Agony, all you can do is walk around with the option of looking for trinkets that may affect how the game ends. And as for the environment, honestly, it's pretty cliché. It's ruins mixed with flesh. We've seen that in a dozen other games, and while I enjoy the aesthetic, Agony doesn't really do anything new with it. Yes, it has gratuitous nudity for an extra edge, but with so much time passing and I can look back at this game with a clear mind, I think it's actually pretty tame. I mean, there's nude women covered in blood driving against one another, which is actually kind of hot. But German goth bands have that in their music videos. It's really not that extreme. That said, I don't think the problem is with the imagination of the creators, but sexual violence is such a sensitive topic. If they really would go all the way with it, the game would have been banned across the globe. After all, that's the reason it's not available to console players. They did go all the way in some of the endings, but while the subject matter was disturbing, the execution and presentation made it pretty ineffectual. And yes, I am talking about the uncensored endings where we did see stuff happen. So, boring gameplay and overhyped environment. The lore was pretty solid, but there is no story to speak of, and the narrative is as complex as a game of snakes and ladders. The solution was to first and foremost finish the graphics, and then add in traps. So, it's a hellish version of Rayman. I can get behind that. One of my biggest problems with the game is how boring the gameplay is. You just walk around and the only sense of threat is your own incompetence and the easily avoided enemies. Not just letting the environment be a stage for the enemies to walk around sounds like a big improvement. I don't think it'll fix any of the major gameplay issues, but seeing as the whole shtick of the game always was to look good, better graphics and traps may be just what it needed. So now, when I and you know what to expect, let's dive into hell one last time and see if Agony isn't a wash-up after all. The game starts off with the admittedly very cool opening.
Into a place which deprives one of faith and erases memories, which leads to madness and emphasizes the boundary between people and beasts.
Now ended with an unrated banner, and we find ourselves in front of the entrance to hell, which I still find odd, but that's nitpicking. At first the gameplay doesn't seem to have changed much. I'm still just walking around the awesome looking environment. However, a few key changes have been made. First and foremost, the gore. The original release had us waiting for 2 levels before we got to destroy some flesh, and all we did before then was run around like a headless chicken to pick stuff up. But in the unrated version, it happens in the first 5 minutes. Even if it takes some suspension of disbelief to accept an emaciated human being able to rip a man's heart out with the ribs, this is a marked improvement from the initial release. The real improvement is how the developers filled the previously vacant environment, because while previously it felt quite bare and desolate, now you can't turn a corner without running into something exciting. And while a lot of things are repetitions, they all have little changes to make them feel unique enough to be memorable. It feels good to have the environment actually be dangerous, and you might think trapdoors, pendulums and spikes would feel silly in this environment. It actually makes it more playful and fun. The final change to the gameplay is the introduction of a map system showing collectibles, quest items, and areas you wouldn't have thought to look for. Something that annoyed me to pieces with the first release was how massive this environment is, and then being given no reason to explore it. The combination of an environment that's fun and challenging, with the map showing where there are things to be picked up, have made exploring the world of Agony the adventure that I wanted it to be. Add to this an abundance of new notes and lore, overhauled graphics, and upgrade system that feels useful, and this game seems to be just as good as we were promised it would be. So is it? Well, I will say this. Agony has been upgraded from a complete wash to a game you can actually play, and I bow my head to the people who made that happen. The story of how it happened is romantic. A small team of dedicated artists all bound together through failure and strife to see the dream they sold brought to life. That is magnificent. But I still don't think it's the masterpiece it was said to be. To explain why, I'm going to need to talk a little bit about the theory of horror across the genre. In general, there are 2 types of horror. There is horror to unnerve and horror to entertain, with a lot of overlap between the 2. Entertaining horror uses morbid imagery and themes as a backdrop to something exciting that isn't trying to scare you. Agony definitely falls into the category of entertaining horror, because it isn't scary if you're used to morbid imagery, but that's not the problem with this game. I think it's fine to enjoy a horror game that isn't scary. The problem is, Madmind Studios wanted to make an entertaining and unsettling game, by giving it some shock value, showing us things and doing things that no other AAA game developer would dare to put in a game. Sexualized horror has seen an uptick in recent years in movies, books, and not the least online. And it's easy to see why, as there's a lot of pensiveness around sex in how it affects us and what it says about us. Agony doesn't try to say anything. In fact, there is no reason for the graphic content, aside from we really wanted to show hell, and horrid things happen there. But instead it makes light of sexualized violence by using it as a decoration on your adventure. Even among passionate horror fans, there is a generalized revulsion towards rape and abuse when it only exists as filler, or is meant as entertainment. It hits too close to home, it feels too loaded, too real. Not to mention, to people who can tell the difference between real-life implications and fictional ones, it's really not that disturbing. Okay, Seeing a short rape an Onoskelis did get to me, but that's just because I really liked Onoskelis. Basically what I'm saying is the very extreme that caused the hype around Agony in the first place is the thing that makes it a very niche game, and I have to acknowledge that. Personally, I don't think it means anything that someone thought of this game, and people paid for it, but it will discourage a lot of horror fans from picking up the game, and I don't fault them for it. I didn't play the whole game before making this video, just enough to get a sense of what MMS did for it, and from what I've seen, they improved most of everything. Even the narrative had a slight improvement, as we got more dialogue from the Red Goddess, and notes to help deepen the world and get a sense of purpose for our actions. It's still just a narrative, which is fine for what it is, but a full story would have been nice. All in all, Agony UNRATED is a perfectly serviceable game, which will appeal to a niche audience, even if it isn't the mastodon it was said to be. Fun enough gameplay in a good-looking world that has a lot of work put into it. Its biggest letdown is the over-reliance on shock value, and it's not as captivating as some other horror survival games out there. And this is how I leave you, finally done with Agony, and ready to take on new things. I'd like to thank the Agony Facebook admin for challenging me to play the game, send out my kudos to the development team for sticking to their unorthodox idea despite everything, and I hope to see more of these guys in the future, but guys, next time, please make sure your game is finished before launching it. Thanks for watching, I have been Sisypheanworks, stay creative, stay passionate, and I will see you again. Hopefully with a working camera next time.